but continue to use Access for querying of data extracts to filter, sort, format, and generate derived fields. Okay. We can talk more about that later. I use Access to filter for querying data extracts to filter, sort, format, and generate derived fields. And I think that most of you should probably use Access because of what you've learned in this class. If you are very familiar with Stata and are good at, the gen command in Stata and manipulating data in Stata, then you should just use Stata and forget Access. If you're equally good with Access and Stata, I would recommend you use Access. And certainly if you're better with Access than with Stata, then you should definitely use Access for formatting your data for export to a statistical analysis package. The reason is that Access was designed with data management questions in mind, whereas Stata was really designed with statistical analysis in mind. You'll find that out in the real world, people use SQL commands to sort data and filter data and so forth, SQL structured query language, and Access is SQL based. That's what you're doing when you use the Access query design grid, is you're building up a SQL or SQL statement. And then you're going to export to Stata or whatever statistical package for analysis.
With these web-based databases, how does HIPAA, how do they deal with HIPAA, questions of HIPAA protection? I mean, can you put your stuff onto the web?
Yeah, you're anticipating a comment I'm going to make later. The answer is that why don't I answer that question now, because I hate lecturers who postpone questions. So I'm going to answer it now. There's two different issues, okay? One issue is HIPAA, patient confidentiality, okay? And there's two ways you can approach that with a web-based database. One is don't store any PHI. What does PHI stand for, by the way? Personal health information. But it's basically identifying information, okay? So one is you can just store all the data based on a code that cannot be deciphered into who the subject really is. The other is just make sure that it's stored securely, which means that you need to have, password, protected access to the database. You need the online database. It needs to be encrypted. And it needs to be, you need to have roles, so only people who have a username which allows them to see PHI can actually see PHI. And those are the people who are members of your study team who have filled out the patient confidentiality agreement and had the training in research ethics and patient confidentiality, which I'm sure you've all done. I haven't had to do the new training yet, but I did it anyway just to see what it was like. It's an online course that you take. How many of you have taken that online course? Okay. Originally, I did it as an in-person course, but now it's an online course. It also helps to have had the servers of the data collection system reviewed by somebody. So the one I'm going to demonstrate for you, question, has been reviewed by UCSF. SurveyMonkey, there is one investigator who I know is using SurveyMonkey with PHI in SurveyMonkey. I'm going to show you SurveyMonkey in a few minutes. And SurveyMonkey, if you pay a little extra per month, you can get all the PHI protection capability. Okay, so PHI and HIPAA compliance is one side of things. Okay, there's a second side of things, which is electronic data keeping. Okay, and so I'm going to write these up. This is HIPAA. Okay, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Okay, that's HIPAA. But basically, it's the privacy rules that are the important part of HIPAA for our purposes. Okay. And then there's also CFR 21, Part 11. And this is Code of Federal Regulations, Chapter 24, Part 11. And This is for electronic data keeping. And the FDA requires you to adhere to these if you're going to have a primary electronic database. And this involves basically an audit trail. The big thing here is an audit trail. And we'll talk about this. But frankly, Access databases and SurveyMonkey databases are not CFR 21 Part 11 compliant, okay? Which means they don't keep an audit trail, which means you can't meet the rules for electronic data keeping, so what do? You keep a paper backup, okay? So if you're doing an FDA study like a new drug investigation or something like that, and you're using an Access database or a SurveyMonkey database, what you need to do is you need to keep a paper backup on that, okay? And your primary data collection has to be the paper. Now, does that mean you have to collect everything on paper and then transcribe it into the computer? No. What it means is when you collect data on the computer, when you're done collecting the data, you have to print out a paper copy of the data that you've collected. So you're kind of using the computer as partially as a typewriter to enter your data, but also you've eliminated the transcription step, okay? So this is if you're doing a new drug investigation or something where you're going to go through the FDA to get approval. This is everybody has to do to comply with research subjects regulations. Okay, so let's talk more about on-screen data collection. We're going to back up for a second and talk more about on-screen data collection. And the only thing I'm going to do now is talk briefly about one of these coded responses, okay? So, and your options for collecting coded responses. So I think you probably all realize that a coded response, where you have limited coded options to respond, is more easy to analyze. In fact, is analyzable, whereas a free text response is not always analyzable, okay? And that's the difference between an open-ended response, which is basically a free text response. Closed-ended is coded options, coded response options. And these are analyzable and these aren't, but often what I'll do is I'll let the data entry people put in free text for a while until I see generally what the options are, and then I'll change it to coded responses, okay? And coded responses, there's one kind of coded response, which is where the options are mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive, okay? And if the options are mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive, it's one column in your database, and you can either use a drop-down list, a pick list, or an option group, okay? So I am now going to demonstrate each of those using the database that you're so familiar with. Now I do have to reopen the one that I said I wasn't going to reopen before. It's the infant jaundice database. So we all know, for example, we'll use the race field. So here's coded options, okay? Actually, there are codes behind these. I think you'll remember that this was 1, this was 2, etc. But the point is that you can use a drop-down list like this. Okay, so that's one way to do coded responses. Another way, this is all just data entry conventions, is you could do it this way with a field list. And the nice thing about field lists is that they work on paper too. So I could print this out and I would still have all my options visible on paper. And obviously that's not going to happen with a drop-down list. If I go into the table form of this, you can see that this is still just one column in the database. Okay. And then your last option for these mutually exclusive things is an option group. Okay. So let's say I mark for Roberto, I mark him as American Indian. Okay. And now, if I click on this white here, what's going to happen to the American Indian thing? Okay, so I'm going to click here. What's going to happen up here?